Hello everyone and welcome to today's performance assurance webinar. My name is Jenny and I'll be facilitating today's event, and today I'm joined by Anton, Daniel and Alex from the performance assurance function. And just before we get started, I just want to go through some housekeeping with you. So as always, the event will be recorded. So if you miss anything, there's always an opportunity to refer back to the slides and the recording when they're posted on the Rec portal. As always, we'll also be using Slido as well. So the QR code and the joining code are on the screen now. And we will have quite a few interactive parts of this session. So we do encourage you to use the Slido function. And there'll also be opportunities for Q&A, which again is done through Slido. So if you have any questions at any point, just pop them into there. So I think I'll leave that on the screen for a moment just for people to join. Just while we're waiting for people to add their name, I will share the agenda with you now. And as you can all see, there are a few bits to get through. So without further ado, I will hand over to Anton.
Well, thank you for making the time to come and speak to us. Performance assurance is a broad area, and it's really important that we're clear about what we're doing and we tailor that to the reality of the market. And speaking to you about that is really important. So as we go along, if you have any particular questions or thoughts, I actually do really value that happening. So I guess that's an open invitation. Those who've been here before, when we always reflect before we start planning these meetings on 4 key questions through your lenses. Kind of, what are the key events from the last quarter, as in what's happened? Like, what are our priorities for the next coming period? What are the impact on you? What do you need to do? And what are the key changes and activities that will take place? So the team have developed some content to talk you through on that. And as I said, we're here to engage with you. So please, if you do have any questions, put up your hand and people will probably deal with it. Take the question at the end of the item. Without further ado, let's go straight into our first item, which is really about looking back at what's happened in the last. Oh, we've lost the slides. The last 3 months that Alex will take us through.
Thank you, Anton. Hi, everyone. My name's Alex. So I'll be talking through the last quarter, including key activities from PAB and performance trends across the market. There we go. We're back. Great. So starting with annulments, the issue was raised as the annulment definition in the Rec code and Ofgem's license conditions varied, which led to some misinterpretations there. So these definitions have now been aligned, and then over the past few months following PAB meetings, we've issued data guidance and discussed the issue at RIG also. And then next week at PAB, we'll also be proposing a modification to the threshold of RD 12.3 to increase its effectivity and improve our understanding of annulments on a wider industry level. Moving on to change of occupier. This has historically been an issue when the objections process hasn't been clear or followed consistently. So RO155 aimed to address this, as well as new guidance documents making it more clear what evidence needs to be supplied. And also new risk drivers 8.12 and 8.13 are helping to monitor changes here. Meanwhile, RO155's effectiveness will also be reviewed in the critical changes deep dive, which will be later discussed by Daniel. On TDIS verification, Ofgem indicated that there should be an increase in the verification of theft investigations that are eligible for incentive payments under the revised arrangements. So PAB have approved 2 new verification pathways last month. First of all, we've got a sample-based validation, which will be applied on a quarterly basis based on data received in the prior quarter. And then in year 1, we're going to be considering a total sample of 250 investigations there. Following on from the sample-based validation, if necessary, when further insight might be required on processes or controls, a further process review assessment would be implemented. And it's intended that this would be applied to no more than 5 parties in year 1 and would likely be done through an information request pat. And then finally, on the data cleanse, obviously it's always been a priority for us, but it's specifically an area of focus now due to MHHS. And so there are concerns that inaccurate data there would hinder this transition. So earlier this quarter, PAB approved 2 new risk drivers around meter technical detail discrepancies. And we've also proposed some data cleanse methodology enhancements to PAB, which aim to provide parties with clear opportunities to input so that the whole process is overall more visible. For example, this included a clear prioritization matrix. And we're hoping that the approach will be finalised in time for the start of Sprint 6 in May 2026. And we've received feedback from PAB on the methodology, and so we'll be considering this and revisions there in a wider data quality improvements deep dive. And so moving into our broader market performance. Thank you. So first of all, looking at Retail Risk 8. So this monitors the potential misuse of objection processes on switches. So we've seen a slight increase over the past quarter, which was primarily due to the risk driver that specifically monitors objections to change of occupier switches. And we saw this increase following the implementation of RO155. Although it is worth noting that the increase has slowed down compared to a 200% increase we saw in the previous quarter. And as aforementioned, this will be reviewed as part of the critical changes deep dive. Looking at inaccurate data in Retail Risk 6 and 10, we have seen a positive decrease on number 6, with less parties over threshold there on risk drivers relating to address updates due to some successful PAT applications. And we have seen, unfortunately, a 50% increase on Retail Risk 10, relating to CSS rejections. But I think it's worthwhile noting here that the actual number of cases above threshold for all risk drivers are actually relatively low, and there haven't been significant increases since the last quarter. So I think the percentages here might almost skew it to appear as a more widespread trend, while it is only a smaller number of parties that have a handful of these cases. And then finally, on Retail Risk 12 and erroneous switches, we've seen a very slight increase of 9%. Which we're not overly concerned by, as in the last quarter we saw a 60% decrease, but this current increase was driven by re-registration delays in gas. So we've collaborated with the ES working group, and we're now issuing inquiries to understand the reasons behind the uptick. And that's it from me. So I'll now be passing on to Daniel Rogers, who will be moving into elements of our forward plan. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Alex. So I'm going to be talking about the forward plan for the next 3 months, which will include a couple of new deep dives that we're undertaking as part of the Performance Assurance Operating Plan. Firstly, though, to embrace this season of festive cheer and goodwill, I'm going to start by running through a checklist of all the fun performance assurance requirements you have this month, before hopefully you can disconnect a little and enjoy some seasonal merriments. So we've got, if we look at this list, so we've got usual 3 activities up front, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So submitting your monthly park reporting requirements, reviewing dashboards for sort of past performance against risk driver scores, and also actioning any PATs that were issued at the start of the month. Then if we look at some of the new activities, so if you're a supplier, I'd recommend reviewing and feeding into the consultation on the target theft methodology, or since we love a good acronym, TTM, which has a response deadline of the 20th of December. So additionally, hopefully suppliers, MEMS and DNOs are aware that the Data Cleanse Sprint 5 is currently underway. So it started on 1st of November 2025 and it runs through to the 30th of April 2026. Next, if you're a supplier, you might have been contacted at the start of this month with a list of meter points where we've identified that you don't have a qualified MEM appointed. So we've asked for you to appoint a qualified MEM by the end of this month. And if you have any questions on this activity or any extenuating circumstances, which means you can't complete it by the end of the month, please do let us know as soon as possible. Then, as Alex mentioned earlier, last month, PAB approved a new TDIS verification process, which will include some suppliers needing to provide evidence of investigations on a sample basis, and some suppliers responding to inquiry PATs on their theft investigations and sort of resolution processes. So if you're one of the lucky suppliers that's been selected as part of the sample, we'll be contacting you via the usual routes, which include contract manager, alternates, and things like that. And then, finally, for suppliers, DNOs, and MEMS, we'll be asking for feedback on the annual rating methodology. But that is an agenda item later, so I don't want to give away too many spoilers. So just checking whether we have any questions on these upcoming activities. So stalling for a second. but it doesn't look like there is.
No
So
questions at the moment, Daniel. Sorry.
amazing. Thanks, Jay. No, thank you for checking. So we could probably move on to then talking about the first of the two deep dives that we're going to be talking about today, which is the cross-code collaboration deep dive. So as always with these deep dives, we're going to give a bit of a brief overview of the scope of the activities, but then we'd be really keen to hear your input on areas that we should be focusing on to sort of define that scope a bit further. So if we please move on to the next slide. As I'm sure you can read for yourselves, the objective of this deep dive is to establish a more effective collaboration mechanisms for managing underperforming parties and enhancing overall performance assurance. But why are we doing this now? So over the last year, we've had a few cases where parties have been subject to performance assurance techniques across multiple codes. We've lacked those defined mechanisms sometimes and processes to effectively collaborate between codes, and that creates more work for us and for parties, and obviously doesn't necessarily lead to the most efficient and impactful outcomes. So thinking also, how these cross-code issues can impact parties. If we take customer direct contracts as an example, so these can impact suppliers' settlement performances under the BSC, but of course suppliers are then reliant on mowers who are being held to account under the REC. So we're therefore going to have a series of workshops between REC, BSC, SEC, UNC, IGT, UNC, and as you can see on these slides, we've included a list of key areas that we're going to be exploring through these workshops. So that includes interdependencies and how the processes align or don't align, how data can be shared between code bodies, how we escalate major service incidents that impact multiple codes, how we can coordinate implementing any sanctions when needed, and think about coordinating the dates and timeframes of some of our key assurance activities, whilst also considering periods of peak activity for you guys as parties. So I think one thing to note is that the scope of this deep dive is focused on performance assurance activities and isn't considering broader market design or how code changes have progressed, which I know are subject to other continuous improvement pieces that we have. Though of course, if any improvement areas outside the scope of performance assurance are identified during these workshops, then we'll be sharing those with the relevant teams for their own information. I think then, if we please move on to the next slide, we can talk through the steps we're going to be taking for this activity. So firstly, as I mentioned, we're going to be holding these workshops between the various codes over the next couple of months, and we'll then be using that outputs from the workshops to present some draft recommendations to the RECPAB in January. And based on the feedback from RECPAB and from the other codes, we'll then finalize the recommendations in February and report out the findings to industry in March. So like I say, in order to help shape what we're going to be discussing during these workshops and make sure that we're focusing on the areas that would be most beneficial for parties, we've got 3 questions that we'd please like your input on. So I think you should be able to access all 3 questions at once via Slido, and then we can go through the results afterwards. But I think for the first one, so we're going to ask, in your experience, which cross-code areas operate most effectively? And when the answers come through, I think we're going to get a nice word cloud on that too. Then secondly, in your experience, which cross-code areas may benefit from greater cross-code collaboration? And then finally, do you have any feedback for us that you'd like us to consider during this deep dive? Like I say, the deep dives are going to be taking place later in this month, and then later in this month in January as well. So if we do receive any feedback over the next few weeks, we'll be able to take that on board as well. But if we then move on to talking about the second deep dive, and then I promise you'll get to hear from somebody else's voice afterwards. This is a deep dive we're going to be doing over critical changes. If we please move on to the next slide. Some of the feedback that we've received from industry is that often when implementing big complex changes, it can take a lot of effort from parties, but we sometimes lose focus on making sure that change is identifying, delivering and realizing the benefits that intended to. We therefore intend to review a complex recent change that had explicit targets of around bringing benefits to parties and to the industry. And I'm going to review whether it did achieve those objectives, and also whether all of the issues around that have been addressed, or whether further work is needed. So in terms of why we're doing this activity, we want to then take the findings from this activity and then apply it to future changes to make sure that the REC is operating efficiently and is enabling this sort of continuous improvement in the industry. So if we please move on to the next slide, we're focusing on one recent major change, which is R155, the sort of change of occupier process change that went through recently. And the reason we're focusing on this change is that it had defined objectives, and in some cases required a lot of effort from parties. And we're going to also be receiving reporting data from parties, which will then help us identify if this change has been implemented effectively. So we're going to be firstly reviewing whether it's achieving some of its aims, which is, customers with change of occupier being able to switch. The process for verifying the change of occupier is being completed within reasonable timeframes. And also following a correct rejection of the change of occupier, then the potential supplier is not just resubmitting requests until circumstances do change. So we're going to be able to use the reporting data to identify if these aims are being met, such as looking at parties with higher than average objections, and then using or COO objections specifically, and then using performance assurance techniques to verify that these objections are correct. And also reviewing that parties' average timeframes are consistent with the 10 working days outlined in the code. We're also going to be considering if we can combine some of the data from STEP on STEP cases with data that we have on parties resubmitting switches, and see if we can sort of derive any insights from that. So so we're going to have some objective measures on whether this change has been effective. But I think another key part in sort of reviewing this is the sentiment from parties on a range of areas, such as if the objective of the changes have been achieved, such as if the objections process and requirements are now clear, whether the benefits have outweighed the costs, whether suppliers believe that other suppliers are acting in line with the code. And it's also going to be important as well to get external engagement too from other impacted stakeholders, such as from like consumer groups or TPIs. So then based on those first 2 points, so objective assessment and also sentiment analysis, we can then do a bit of a retrospective activity with stakeholders on whether further changes are needed for R155, if so what, like, wording in the code, further guidance documents, specific performance assurance activities. And then also importantly, what can be learned for future changes, especially in any cases where there are negative sentiment, understanding, why this came about and how we can avoid that in the future. So if we please move on to the next slide, the high-level process for this deep dive is going to be reviewing the effectiveness of the change, like I say, using the reporting, using the sentiments analysis, using the stakeholder retrospective, then form opinions on the effectiveness of the change and any recommendations for further steps for this change or for other changes, and then consider whether these recommendations would also have been applicable to other changes and would have benefited other changes in meeting their outcomes as well. But like I say, in terms of hopefully getting some stakeholder feedback from parties in terms of areas that we want to focus on, if we please move on to the next slide, I think we've got some more Slido questions. So like I say, we've outlined a few different areas there. So the objective assessment based on reporting data, sentiment analysis, stakeholder retrospective. If there are any other areas that the parties think we should be considering when determining whether a change has been effective, please do let us know. And then if we look at a couple of the other questions as well, so one of the things we want to do is really hyper-focus on one specific change and then see if any of the lessons learned from that change could then have impact on other changes as well. But if parties think that we should be considering sort of a wider array of changes, we'd be happy to try and understand that feedback. And if so as well, specifically, what are the changes that you think we should be looking at? So I don't know if you guys want another 2 minutes of my small talk with Jenny after the painful experience of last time. But I can see we've got one participant responding at least, so that's positive. And like I say, we can. I think I've got another slide on this, so we can maybe talk through that. And like I say, we'll take away any of the comments that we received during the webinar or after the webinar and sort of feed that into the scope. So if we please, Jenny, just move on to the next slide. So in terms of next steps on this one, like I say, this is the first time that we're sort of announcing this activity to industry. We're then going to, based on any feedback we receive, refine the scope and sort of take it to our PAB in January for PAB to feed into the scope of this deep dive. We'll then be doing the work sort of in sort of springtime with an aim of reporting back to you guys in the market and also to PAB in May with any recommendations for any further changes. Cool. And like I say, Jenny, I think maybe after this meeting, if we can maybe resend the polls and just keep them open for a little bit, and then we can get any other feedback from that. I don't know if anyone does want to sort of raise their hand or put in a comment for any feedback. Because if not, then I think we've got an exciting next feature coming up on the annual rating, which is one of everyone's favorite topics. And I think we'll be passing over to Mr. Anton Moden to talk through that.
Hello again. So we appreciate that the annual rating is a thing that is people want us to do skillfully. It's an important thing that's driven fundamentally by the PAB, but people are concerned that we do it skillfully. So we put a lot of effort into communicating about it, but also doing it in a sensible way. So that's what I wanted to talk about. We just skip on to the next slide. So for those of you who haven't thought about this before, let's think about the purpose, the current state, and what we've been trailing for probably a year now that we're going to do. So this is a form of peer comparison, which under the code is a performance assurance technique, which gives parties an overall rating on the rep. The main purpose is to help parties assess how well they're doing, but also for you to understand where you are in a group. It also helps us understand behavior across different parts of the market. So it is possible that large suppliers might have a different profile to small suppliers or medium suppliers. Equally, I&C specialist suppliers might look different. And if that's the case, that does allow us to treat the whole group. So, for example, we have amended our rating over time to reflect some of the differences being a solely I&C supplier brings. But we've also changed and updated the code based on these things. So it's got kind of multi purposes. Currently, it applies to DNOs and suppliers, fundamentally because we have most performance information about those organisations. As we consulted on last year, we intend to extend this to metering organisations, and there's been a lot of thought put into how to do that. So I just want to take you through kind of the process and where we are roughly with that. So if we flick on, we follow quite a rigorous timetable, and actually, like it's nearly Christmas now, and we're thinking of September 2026. That's when these ratings will be published. We want to follow a very similar process to last year, which will involve consulting on the criteria. This is most impactful for the metering organisations, but I also want to be clear, for suppliers, there are some small changes, so it definitely is worth looking at the consultation when it comes out. Fundamentally, we want to stick with the same approach, but for suppliers, there is a tweak based on our experience through the year. Nobody likes, I can't pretend to be as amusing as Daniel, but nobody likes a Christmas consultation, either because a deadline just before Christmas or something that kind of implies people will be working just after Christmas can be very operationally difficult. Like we've worked many of our team have worked in the parties, so we understand how difficult that can be. So because of that, we're going to make sure when we launch the consultation that there is plenty of time for people to look at it, even if they pick it up in January, so that you can think about this properly, you can prioritize it in your workload, and you can have a proper think and provide us some really good quality answers or inputs if you think that's appropriate. We do have a framework that involves kind of a human in the loop, you might call it, from the AI world. And it's not just one human, it's not just me. There's the whole PAB there. We take our decisions to PAB because they represent all of the parties under the code and external specialist input and kind of representatives of consumers. They are there to approve the criteria based on a range of things that we tell them, but also outputs from the consultation. It's really important. They also have a look at what it actually looks like in case something a little bit odd happened or something a bit unexpected. So there are controls to make sure that it kind of is sensible. And the most important control of all, which operated, I would say, really well last year, is a query window. So some of these ratings get published to peers. We think a principle is really important. You should see your rating kind of early before that, so you're aware of that message. But also, just in case there's some kind of confusion, that can be cleared up. So we have what's called a query window, and there were people who raised queries in that window and had things kind of updated and reflected, and we think that's really, really important. That ends in September, where these ratings will be communicated to you, and those that are published to peers you'll be able to see. So if we move on, I'm going to spend most of my time, in fact, almost all of my time, talking about MEMS now. We trailed, in fact, we consulted on our intention to extend this to MEMS. Metering parties are really important, and they have several really important activities. They are essential to maintaining high quality data. That helps billing, it helps settlement, it helps customers. It's really a key element of this marketplace. We've got ComCop in place, which is a kind of a single source of really important obligations, many of which are about keeping the public safe. These are essential, and we really want to encourage people to be very good in these areas, but also to give a positive customer experience. So we've had a think. Should we move on to the next slide, which is the big reveal of our proposed criteria? So when developing criteria, it's really important they're objective, they're fair. These are important, and they are deliverable, frankly. There's no point me suggesting a criteria that we can't report on. So we've got 6 key areas that we want to flag that will drive the inputs. And there is, I will put it up in a minute, a spreadsheet, like a spreadsheet type thing, where you can see exactly how this will work, and that's the same approach as to happen for suppliers. So if you're a supplier and a metering provider, you'll be familiar with that kind of approach. But these are the things that we have identified that could work as criteria. So a key one is fulfilling your ComCop audit on a timely basis. So we do understand that there are sometimes cases where the audit can't be fulfilled as planned. You know, there might be someone struck down with sickness, but there is a balance between pragmatism in those areas and making sure that audits do happen when they should. And we'll propose some criteria about that. I think it is a basic expectation that these audits happen appropriately, that they're paid and completed on time, and I think that's a really key part of the kind of regulatory framework. Probably more important is audit findings. So doing an audit on time is one thing, but doing an audit right, getting the right result, that's fundamentally the point, isn't it? So we're thinking about audit findings and the kind of proportion of successful audit findings. That's really important, and that the audit findings that are raised are closed promptly. Now, again, we need to be pragmatic about this, but there is a difference between someone closing audit findings within a month and someone taking 6 to 12 months to do it. That fundamentally feels different. Maintenance of qualification, this should be a basic requirement. People don't have massive requirements to maintain their qualification. Doing these things on time is really important, and should be easy enough to schedule and get done. It is possible we have some CME conditions in this space. They are not super common. If people breach their CME conditions, we take quite a dim view of that. That seems like poor regulatory management. So that is another thing. Action plans or persistent performance issues. So if we have identified an area where a MEM is not performing well and we need to take several interventions, that clearly should drive our rating. That shouldn't be kind of a separate thing. Now, I've given you a flavour of these. In our consultation, we will be asking questions about these ratings and whether there are any better things that we've missed or any things that should be adjusted. We genuinely want that. We have actually been looking for one particular category that we haven't been able to find, and I really would plea that anybody can help us. Sometimes these ratings are maybe the way I would say it, negatively framed, but we have been searching and we've put a lot of time into this and identified potential ones that we've had to rule out for a range of reasons. We'd really love for suppliers, DNOs, metering organisations, anyone, any way that we could identify positive behaviours that kind of meet those criteria. You know, they're kind of measurable, they're fair, they're objective. So please, if you do look in the consultation, please do suggest any. We would love to have some more positive spin on this, but put a lot of time into it and haven't found it just yet. So without further ado, the big table reveal. For metering organisations, we're going to split it from those who are fundamentally about sending flows and those who are fundamentally about doing on-site work, noting some people do both, right? These are the kinds of criteria that we would have. So you can see ComCop timeliness. We would see it as a severe weakness if people are delaying for 3 months or more, or have kind of severe issues in their ComCop audit result. And there are a range of other kind of items there. I will call out delivering data cleanse for MAMs and mowers is going to be really key. We don't think that needs a severe rating if someone isn't getting where they could do, but that is a thing that we would really focus on. I'll just flick on to EMOs, which is EMOs and AMIs, which is a bit different. You can see in the audit, it's essentially the same. We have considered, although actually I'm not sure that should be on there. We had considered including SMIS results in there. I don't think that will be in the consultation. I think that might be tricky for us to deliver with the SMIS designed as it is. But here are some ideas. So I guess the key message from me is it's a lot of change for metering providers. There will be a consultation on the lot, and we would really, really value your input because these are our proposals at the moment, and we would like the proposal, when it is implemented, to be the best one it possibly can be. So I'd like to pause for any hands or questions. That obviously is possible here on the annual rating, or always the one that's a bit, you never know what you're going to get, or any questions on the content today or any other performance assurance or qualification matter.
Thanks, Anton. The Slido is running at the moment, but we don't have any questions just yet, so I'll just leave it open for a moment and see if anything comes through. Okay, I can't see anybody typing at the moment, so if any questions do arise at any point, you can always email inquiries@recmanager.co.uk and the team will answer your questions there. So I guess that just leaves us to say thank you very much for attending today's session. We have issued a short feedback survey just to let us know the usefulness of this webinar. We find your feedback really useful, so any responses to that are valued. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.